The Times is a very smart business. They are so good at making money. And yet even they, with all their resources, they had no game plan. And this is what they told me. Like, as soon as Twitter one day started saying how terrible I was, I got a call from somebody at the Times who works in PR and crisis management. And she definitely there's enough in play to say like, hey, we want to make sure you're not just sitting there reading all this stuff. Do you have a mental health care professional, or do you want us to get you one on the company, talk to a therapist? Are you with your friends? Are there people around? And they say like, it's our experience that when people go through something like this, it can really be distressing. And we want to make sure you're in a safe place that you don't get hurt. Like, they had my back. They had that. But then even on the same call, I'm like, so what do we do? And she said, we don't exactly know yet the strategy that makes this go away. So the first thing we do is we try to ignore it. And it's hard, but we're going to just try and ignore it and hope that it goes away. Like, that was what they did back then. And of course it didn't go away, and it snowballed, and eventually it started to catch other people I worked with into it. And there were challenges made online that out to my friends and colleagues that if they wouldn't distance themselves from me, there'd be consequences for them. Some of those same guys I was just talking about how much I loved working with them at Radiolab, and I felt like they were my crew. Like, some of them felt pressured to publicly distance themselves from me, which was especially heartbreaking. And even I didn't know, Megan, I didn't quite know if I should or shouldn't say something. Like, part of me just wanted to be like, I'm really, really sorry for all the things I did, but I can't apologize for the things I didn't do. You're accusing me of serious crimes.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to say. Like, how do you show humility and say, oh, I'm super embarrassed about these things? And of course, as a person, even now, I have so much to grow on. I'm not some freak, some egotistical monster. I own this stuff I did. But what you're actually accusing me of and trying to force me out of my job for, this is false accusations. Like, if the criminal justice system worked the way that the social justice system that you guys are pushing worked, which, by the way, the same crowd, very critical of the criminal justice system for all the ways in which it could be more just. I agree with them on some of that. But the draconian nature of the social justice system, they seem so blind to it. And I didn't know how to communicate that. And so I didn't say anything. And I hoped it went away. And it didn't. And now we look back a few years later, and I think that I know what I could say, and I know what I could have done. And I think even the Times has changed their strategy a lot to not succumb to these things. And even my friends, I'm still friends with many people at the Times, they all agree that this would not happen now. If the exact same thing happened today that happened in December of 2020, wow, it's already been 4 years. If that happened today, just like it did then, I'd be fine. I'd still have my job. Which is just so you know, they're not calling to tell me they'd like me to take the job back.
They're just saying, if this hadn't had happened at the time it did happen. I mean, that's the thing, is that, it probably wouldn't, for sure, it wouldn't go down today the way it went down then. So it's hard to even say, what would you do differently? I don't know if there is, do you think that there was something that could have been done at that time in 2020 that would have led to a better or more fair outcome?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with hindsight, it's so much clearer to see. I mean, thing one is the company should have just released a statement that simply said, we have investigated Andy and his behavior and the crimes that he's being accused of having commit on the internet are baseless and untrue. He remains sorry for dumping the drink on the woman's head, but that happened in 2014 at a different job. That is not a fireable offense in 2020 at a different job. In fact, it's against the rules of the union that I was a part of to penalize me in my current job for that. And we are moving on. And people would have been mad for 24 hours, maybe 48 hours, maybe a week. And then they just would have moved on to somebody else. It would have been just give it a little time. And then it would have especially been good had I not been in the emotional distress I was in. And if I could have articulated then what I can now, it's just like when you're in the middle of a public shaming, part of you do feel like a witch when everyone's shouting witch. Like there's a little part. I was thinking about sins that I could, the old Christian me was coming back. I was like thinking of sins I committed as a young person. I was like, well, maybe I do deserve this. Like maybe deep down I am a really bad person. So I was in no position to give a quote to Brian Stelter at CNN or, Eric Wimple at Washington Post when they're calling. Because, and also this is the truth, is like when you get a call, this is like one of the things that makes the story so interesting. I mentioned this talking to Tara, but I think it bears repeating. The worst part as a journalist going through this was that it was one thing when people were like saying this stuff on Twitter, and I'm not very famous, so I don't know, it was a few thousand people, whatever. It's not the end of the world. But when I got the call from the Washington Post, when I got the call from CNN, when I got the call from NPR that they were now going to do a story on it, my heart didn't go, oh, well, thank goodness. Reporters are getting in. Now that reporters are they're going to get to the bottom of it, and this will all get cleared up. No, I had the opposite. I was like, oh no. These guys are going to use this to get attention on the internet, and there's no way they're interested in telling the true story.
Right.
And that's really heartbreaking. I hope